Hello, church, and welcome to the Midweek Pastor's Update for Thursday, February 25th, 2021. I'm sitting in my backyard right now, and it's almost eerie how quiet it is. Of course, a plane just started flying overhead, but any of you who've lived in Auburn for any amount of time know how precious true silence can be it because of airplanes or people doing yard work. It seems like every day there's some team of a crew, cleaning someone's yard, or the train, or the highway, or so those moments of silence are pretty precious. I hope you're discovering a few bonus moments of silence where you need them as we move into the season of Lent now, into our second week, our second Sunday coming up of Lent. Really, one announcement I want to make, or an update, a thank you, and that is just those that brought some items that I mentioned in the worship service last Sunday, related particularly to helping those in the homeless camp just outside of DeWitt. We're partnering right now with Auburn Presbyterian, and the woman's name is Leah Cappuccino. And anyway, I had mentioned a list of things, and people have just been so generous, as always, so appreciative of your generosity. And I'll include them here too. I'm just going to read them to you. And I think I actually mentioned in the worship service that I was going to have an actual list that showed. I forgot to do that, so I will make sure to include the actual list, like something embedded in this video, so you can take a picture of it, write it down or whatever. But it's so jugs of water, and by that, like the 5-gallon jugs, the bigger jugs of water, baby wipes, the small Coleman camp-size propane canisters, large waterproof tarps. Those are really hard to come by and so important. Although thankfully lately we've not needed the rain protection as much, but it'll likely come again. Batteries of any sizes and types. Batteries are always good. Garbage bags, that's always important. Sleeping bags and blankets, so stuff for warmth. Warm socks. And you know what? It doesn't have to be wool socks, just white socks. Just white socks can be they just mean the world. Clean socks. So scarves and warm hats, and then warm shoes and boots. So again, I'm gonna make sure to put that list in this update today. But thank you for those that submitted items. They're sitting over at church. I'm going to be bringing them over this weekend to Auburn Pres, and then they will get to where they need to be very, very soon. And also, no specific updates yet, but we're making progress on allocating the funds that were gathered for the COVID relief fund, and that is up to like $5,700. So you all have just created this amazing opportunity for us to really make a difference in our community. So thank you. We're working with trying to allocate it, sort of just disperse it in places where it'll make the most difference. So we're talking to our partners right now. I will make sure to let you know when that's actually been dispersed. So as we continue to move into Lent, I can't help but think of where we all were 1 year ago. 1 year ago. The pandemic was, at this point, still something that a lot of us thought was happening elsewhere in the world, that it wouldn't happen here. And now, 1 year later, we've just hit that 500,000 person milestone of lives lost to COVID-19. And that number, the thing is, the number itself doesn't really do justice. It doesn't really fully help us appreciate the full impact of this pandemic with the losses of life, yes, of course, but the inability to be there, to hold hands, to say goodbye, like the losses of livelihood, the economic impact, that's another area. The indignation that arises in us when we see what feels like an ineffectual response. And that might be on the part of leadership, but it might also be on the part of our neighbors, or sometimes even our own family, where there's just such a distinct approach to how we handle this, and no sort of shared, unified way. And it just makes it so much more stressful. There's been a lot of good news lately with the increasing vaccinations, with this precipitous drop in many of the new infection rates and the numbers and all that. And yet, we're still so far from being out of the woods. We all want to be out of the woods. But right now, it's all woods. This is where we are. We've said before, or I've said before, that the job that we have as people of faith, as a church, as humanity, is not to rush through this, not to push those numbers aside, not to get numb to them, because that's easy. It's like we get tired of that, whether it's the numbers of deaths, the numbers of new cases, just numbers. You can't help but fight that, that tendency that we all have to be numb to this. But our task as people of faith, as a church, is to hold space for the real human costs of all of this. And that not just during Lent, but really during life, our life as a community of faith, the way we walk through life is not to shy away from these places of grief and pain and struggle. We talk about it, so often, in our sermons and in our other sharing, but this is such a real world example of just, this is what's required of us. Because if we're really going to process this, which we can't possibly have processed this. We're still in the midst of it. But if we're going to process this, if we're going to move through it, we need the spaces of sacred community to give us a vessel in which we might lament and remember, and ultimately to heal. So as we move into Lent, this is what we will aim to do as a church, to create spaces of lament, of remembering, of healing. That's part of what the Ash Wednesday Project initiated. An awareness, of what we're feeling, of where we really are, what's really going on. With no worry about having to hide it, just be it in a world right now where it's hard to know. I feel like I go through my days and I'm like just doing. And it can be hard to be reflective. Maybe that's a parenting thing, but I think it's more than that. I think there's part of us that maybe we just recognize that the reflective work is hard work. It's easier to stay busy. It's easier to kind of keep moving forward, So our job as a church is to provide space for the slowing down or the stopping. Space could be physical space, could be, opportunities, even though it's hard for us to gather physically, but it could be that. But it's really an intention. that I'm talking about here in this current day and age. An intention of welcoming in the wilderness, of accepting that this is where we are. We're not out of it. We're right in it. And so it's with clarity, that we as a church seek to move through these spaces with a sense of openness to it for what it really is, not what we wish it was, not what we're ready for it to be. That will come. But right now, as we enter into this space of Lent, as our reality of life in this country, over this past year, is that the life expectancy of Americans has sort of dropped by 1 year, and more so, much more so, twice of that in the minority communities, so dramatically affected by this pandemic. But we're in those spaces. We're in that time. And so as a church, let's be in that wilderness. Let's be in that place of grief. Not just because we want to wallow, but just because that's where we are. So we create the space. We welcome the space to grieve. I don't know what grief looks like for each person, because it's so personal. But it's that space to remember, to not be numb, to feel things, to express them, and to move toward healing. That's our work, friends. My prayer for you, my prayer for this country, is that we give ourselves to that holy work. Because it will bear such powerful fruit. And eventually we will be moving towards that place where we're not wandering and feeling in the wilderness all the time, but that where we will be stepping into a place of promise. Wherever you are in the wilderness, wherever you are in your Lenten journey, your experience of Lent right now, know that you are not alone. The source of all love is always by your side. Till we talk again, friends, may each one of you be held in the love of Christ. Amen.